So this morning we're going to talk about, I got my clicker. This morning we're going to talk about changing the story. And like Jeff, I've already got my 2 bottles of water up here. I'm through one of them almost already. But I want to take a quick poll before we get started. So, one of the things that I don't like, if I'm reading a book or I'm watching a movie and you're like the first chapter of the book and you're like, I already know what's going to happen. I already know how this is going to end. Or you're watching a movie and you're in it and you're like, yeah, they're the murderer. I got it. So I want to take a quick poll. Am I the only one? If you love surprise endings, I want you to raise your hand. Raise your hand high. Okay, so I'm not the only one that really likes to get to the end of the book and go, I didn't know that. So I looked it up on the internet, so it's got to be true. What movie has the most surprise ending? This is according to Internet Movie Database. What do you think? Any guesses? The Sixth Sense. Every Hallmark movie. Yeah, I never see that one coming. Wait a minute. They're in a small town that they grew up in and the weather kept them there? That's crazy. I've never seen that before. No, it's actually The Sixth Sense. Remember? I see dead people. Remember that one? So The Sixth Sense, it was actually the second highest grossing movie in the year it was released. And it was released in August, and it was the highest grossing movie in August for several years after that. So apparently I'm not the only one. People like surprise endings. In fact, I believe we are wired to like surprise endings. I really do. Not everyone raised their hand, but I think we're really wired to love surprise endings, and here's why. It's in God's nature to do the unexpected. I can't be the only one that, just when I think I've got God figured out, he's like, watch this. You're not going to believe this, right? And I think he loves to do that, because I told someone the other day, they're like, well, this is what I think is going to happen. And I'm like, well, you realize God's got a sense of humor, right? And that may not be how it works out. Just because you think it is, God's probably going to go back and change it on you. So it's in God's nature to do the unexpected. And I think we're wired to love that. I think we're wired when God does the unexpected for us, that we go, yeah, that was good. That was good. I didn't expect that. So we're going to read something here, and it's going to be pretty long. It's 2 Chronicles 32, 1 through 23, and you can either follow along in your Bible or I'll read it to you. But here's what I want you to do. In the theme of surprise endings in movies, as I read through this, I want you to picture a Hollywood blockbuster, right? I want this to be the script of a Hollywood blockbuster. So you can close your eyes. You can do whatever it takes to try to visualize how Hollywood would portray this, okay? And I think this will make it a little bit more exciting. I'll give you a second to get there. And I practiced these names, so I really want to say them right. Okay, here we go. So picture it in your mind, right? It's black screen and it fades into the scene. After these things and these acts of faithfulness, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and invaded Judah and encamped against the fortified cities, thinking to win it for himself. So let me set this up. This is about a king named Hezekiah, and he's in Judah. And we'll get to the backstory here in a little bit, like, a good prequel will. And so there's this king named Sennacherib, and he's the king of Assyria. And first of all, Assyria is mean, right? Assyria is a force to be reckoned with. And by all accounts, Sennacherib is the meanest of the mean. So he's the king of Syria, and he came and invaded Judah and encamped against the fortified cities, thinking to win them for himself. Okay, so that's the setup. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and intended to fight against Jerusalem, he planned with his officers and his mighty men to stop the water of the springs that were outside the city, and they helped him. Visualize that in your head. And a great many people were gathered, and they stopped all the springs and the brook that flowed through the land, saying, why should the king of Assyria come and find much water? Right? He's setting them up. And he set work resolutely and built up all the wall that was broken down and raised towers upon it. And outside he built another wall, and he strengthened the Millo in the city of David. The Millo's kind of an earthen wall, kind of a terraced wall in the city of David. And he also made weapons and shields in abundance, right? So you can picture this. This is only in a few sentences, but you can picture all these people getting together. They've got this very nasty king right on their doorstep, and they're strengthening the walls. They're building them up. They're putting towers. They're finding anything they can to build build shields and swords and get ready for this attack. And he set combat commanders over the people and gathered them together in the square in the gate of the city and spoke encouragingly to them, saying, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria and all the hordes that are with him." I love this line, right? This is a blockbuster movie line. "For there are more with us than there are with him. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us fight our battles." And the people took confidence from the words of Hezekiah, the king of Judah. Right? You got this pictured in your head? After this, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, who was besieging Lachish with all the forces, sent his servants to Jerusalem to Hezekiah, king of Judah, and to all the people in Judah who were in Jerusalem, saying, "Thus says Sennacherib, king of Assyria, on what are you trusting that you endure this siege in Jerusalem? Is not Hezekiah misleading you that he may give you over to die by famine or thirst when he tells you the Lord of our God will deliver us from the hand of the king of Assyria?" Some major trash talking going on, right? "Has not the same Hezekiah taken away his high places and his altars and commanded Judah and Jerusalem, before one altar you shall worship on it and you shall burn your sacrifices? Do you not know what I and my fathers have done to all the peoples in other lands? Were their gods of the nation of the lands able to deliver them from the lands out of my hand?" Basically saying everyone else said their God was going to save them too, and they didn't. "Who among all the gods of those nations that my father devoted to destruction was able to deliver his people from his hand, that your God should be able to deliver you from my hand? Now, therefore, do not let Hezekiah deceive you or mislead you in this fashion. And do not believe him, for no God of any nation or kingdom has been able to deliver his people from my hand or the hand of my fathers. How much less will your God deliver you out of my hand?" And the servants were still more against the Lord, and his servant said still more against the Lord and against his servant Hezekiah. So they just kept on and on and on. And then it got even worse. They got on Instagram and Twitter, and they wrote letters to cast contempt on the Lord, the God of Israel, and to speak against them, saying, like the gods of the nations of the lands who have not delivered my people from their hands, so the God of Hezekiah will not deliver his people from my hand. And they shouted it with a loud voice in the language of Judah to the people of Jerusalem who were on the wall, to frighten and terrify them in order that they might take the city. And they spoke of the God of Jerusalem, listen to this, as they spoke of the gods of peoples of the earth, which are the works of men's hands. Matt talked about that last week, this idol worship, right? And I love that line too. "How dare you speak of our God like you speak of all the other gods that failed, because they're just the work of men's hands." Then Hezekiah the king and Isaiah, have you guys heard of Isaiah? He was a prophet. He wrote a little book that's like long. And Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, prayed because of this and cried to heaven. Now, this is really interesting to me. I want to pause the movie just for a second. So early on in this, when he's building the walls and he's making the weapons and he's doing all these things, my first thought is, Hezekiah acts just like I act when I get in trouble. I'm thinking, I got this. I can handle this. I'm strong enough to deal with this problem. I don't need God. I can do it. But all this time, that's not what Hezekiah was doing. There was a movie many, many years ago called Facing the Giants. And there was maybe you guys have seen it, but there was a phrase in that movie that said, "Prepare your fields for rain." And that phrase has always stuck with me. And that's what Hezekiah is doing, right? And I believe that's what God wants to do. He's not saying, I don't trust God by the preparation I'm doing. I'm just preparing. And I'm still going to trust God. I'm going to get my fields ready, and I'm going to trust God is going to bring the rain. But if God brings the rain and my fields aren't planted and they're not plowed, it doesn't make any difference. And so he's saying, I want God to be successful. I don't know how he's going to handle this, but I feel like I need to get ready. And so he gets ready, and then he gets down on his knees. So then Hezekiah, the king of Isaiah, the prophet, the son of Amos, prayed because of this and cried to heaven. And the Lord sent an angel who cut off the mighty warriors and commanders and officers in the camp, and the king of Assyria, so he returned with shame of face to his own land, and he came to the house of his God. Some of his sons struck him down there with the sword. So the first time I read this, and it says, he sent an angel who cut off all the mighty warriors. I think of like the Westerns, right? Cut them off at the pass, right? So I'm thinking here, he sent an angel, they're trying to escape, and he went and cut them off. Or maybe they're trying to invade, and they cut him off, and they're not going to let him invade. There's an angel there saying, no, you guys turn around, or these are not the Israelites you're looking for, or whatever they said back then. But when you read, so Isaiah was there too. And you read the account in Isaiah, which we're going to do here in a second. You don't have to turn there. I'll show it to you. But what they cut him off from was like breathing. I mean, when it says they cut him off, they cut him off. And so if you go to Isaiah 37, 36 through 38, it says that the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. So this is the main reason I wanted you to picture this as a movie. Because in the Bible, it's one sentence. The angel of the Lord came and they struck him off. But you know, if this was a movie, this is the climax scene, right? And I don't know how your mind works. And this is the part where I'm going to apologize. I don't know how your mind works, but in my mind, an angel shows up with a flaming sword like he does everywhere else, right? And he didn't, if God was going to go, they're dead, he could have done that without an angel. He sent an angel, and the angel went whoosh, right? And he's going through, and you could picture this blockbuster scene, right? Where he's going through 185,000, they don't have a chance. He's flinging the sword, and they're running, and they're screaming. And then it says, when the people arose the next morning, behold, all there was dead bodies, right? Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home. And this even gets better in Isaiah. Returned to Nineveh, and as he was worshiping his God, his sons came in and killed him. Is that a blockbuster movie or what? Is that a blockbuster movie or what? So I want to go back to Chronicles. I want to finish this up here. Right, so we had our big climax scene. Picture that in your head. The big angel coming along, killing everybody, wiping everybody out. The sun rises the next morning, and there's just dead bodies. Where they were scared that they were going to get attacked, all they see is the army dead. So the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and from the hand of all his enemies. And he provided for them on every side. And many brought gifts to the Lord, to Jerusalem, and precious things to Hezekiah, the king of Judah, so that he was exalted in the sight of all nations from that time onward. God changed the story, right? We knew what Hezekiah didn't know what the story was going to be, but he had a feeling, right? He was up against a fierce foe that this Sennacherib had no problem killing people. He did it all the time. He went through and he wiped out people, and no one could stop him except for God. God changed the story in a miraculous way. So why is this account in the Bible? Why do we put that in the Bible? It wasn't because it wanted to be some big blockbuster story, because the best part of the story, they went and the angels cut him off, right? It wasn't to make God look good. The account is in the Bible because, and I say this every time I'm up here, the Bible is full of examples, not exceptions. What God wanted us to hear from this story is that no matter what you're up against, I can change your story too. You're not going to be up against the king of Assyria. There's no chance. But you might be up against something that's just as big, or at least feels just as big. The Bible is full of examples, not exceptions. So I want to give you some more examples out of the Bible. And I'm going to try this in my best movie voice. Moses, a baby, born destined to be killed, but saved and raised in Pharaoh's house, only to be used by God to set his people free. Right? We got some more examples. Rahab, is that dumb yet? A prostitute in the town of Jericho takes in spies from another country that are scouting the city before its destruction. Her bravery and faithfulness saves her and her entire family. Saul, while on a journey to put an end to a new religious sect called the Way, Saul is blinded and confronted by Jesus, who changes his heart, his mind, and his name. And of course, Jesus, a baby born in a manger, comes to save the whole world from eternal punishment. Now, out of those examples, Jesus is probably the only one who knew what was going to happen. Do you really think that, when Moses was young, he knew how his story was going to end? He knew what he was going to face. He knew what he was going to go through. Do you think Rahab, she was a prostitute in this town. No one says what happens to her after she survived, but I'm guessing she's not a prostitute anymore. I'm guessing she's working for God. Right? Saul, well, we know what happened to him. But I guarantee you, when he's on that road, he did not know how his next year was going to go. The way he thought things were going to happen, it did not happen that way. As much as we enjoy a plot twist in a movie, I think maybe we're yearning for a plot twist in our own life even more. And I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but maybe that's you, right? Maybe you're sitting out there today going, I could use a change. The direction I'm heading, the things I'm up against, the things I'm doing right now, I need a change. Maybe you're up against something that feels every bit as big. So I want to read you this verse that came to me, and then I want to tell you a little story. So 1 Corinthians 2:9, and this is quoted from elsewhere in the Bible, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But what no eye has seen, no ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. I want to read that again and let that soak in. What no eye has seen, nor ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. Can you imagine that? No, you can't. It just said you can't imagine that, right? So I want to blow your mind for a second. I want you to imagine something that's imaginable. Got that? Anyone got it? Right. So what's so awesome about God is, we always quote, I know the plans for you, I know the plans for you, they're going to prosper you, right? But we don't have any idea. We don't have any idea what God's got in store for us. It says it right here. No eye has seen, no ear has heard. You can't imagine what I've got in store for you. Does that excite anyone else? Does that excite anyone else that what God has planned for each and every one of us, we can't even imagine? Has anyone kind of lived that in their life? I know I have. I know the place I am today, I could not have imagined being there 20 years ago. And I know several of your stories, you're the same way. So I want to tell you something. So Matt and I talk about this, and Jeff and I talk about this all the time. Dennis does this every week, and God bless him, because it is a huge, huge strain to do this every week. We get to do it a couple times a year, and it's rough. And so I actually, a few weeks ago, we kind of had this plan, maybe even a couple months ago, and I'd started working on a message. And a few weeks ago, God's like, no, I don't want you to do that one. I want you to do this other one. And so I was there Friday working on it, and I'd taken notes, and I'd had everything kind of going. And I just keep asking God, is this what you want me to say? Am I saying this because I just put this verse in? And honestly, at the time, it felt like it didn't fit. But it was in my notes. I pulled it up. I got it from somewhere. And so I put it in. And I said, God, I don't see how this fits. Is this really what you want me to say? And so I was sitting there at my computer, and I've got my AirPods in, and I'm listening to one of my playlists, one of my Apple playlists, just a standard Apple playlist. And I swear I hear God's voice go, listen to these songs. And I may not make it through this. Listen to these songs. And I'd been listening, but not listening. And so I took some notes here, because I'll tell you why in a second. Here's the songs that were in the playlist. And I was on See Me Through It when this said. And he goes, just look at what I've been playing for you. And when I started working on this, I'd sat down, and Sunday Sermons was the first song. He said, look at what I'm playing for you. And maybe you're familiar with these songs, maybe you're not, but I've got some of the lyrics. I went back through the lyrics, and as I was asking God, are you sure this is what you want? Here's what he told me. Sunday sermons. Every one of these Sunday sermons, every time the choir would sing, I could hear my Savior calling, telling me how much he loves me. Joy in the morning. Everything happens for a reason, but you don't know what you don't know, and you'll never have peace if you don't let go of tomorrow, because it ain't even faith till your plan falls apart. The healing, because I can feel him rising up on the inside, a fire burning, wild, and bringing me to life. My God is so much more than just a feeling. It's my healing. Plans. You've got plans for me. You've got plans for me greater than my wildest dreams, right? Stronger than my enemies. See me through it. You're going to see me through it. If anybody can, you can do it. And whenever my hope runs away, you save the day. You're going to see me through it. Fight on my knees. Sometimes we feel so lost we think we'll never be found. Sometimes we build our plans, but then they fall to the ground. You might not know it, but someone's been praying for you this very moment. Feels like a whisper, but in heaven it's loud. Who can bend, and then for the good, who can bend my burdens and make them beautiful? Who can bring the healing to the hurt I hold? Who can part the waters when I'm needing away? Though I'm walking through the valley, I believe when you say, for the good, you work all things together. And then heart of God, I know you're hurting. I can see it in your eyes. So pull back the curtain and take off your disguise. Whoever told you it ain't worth the fight, the cross tells a story that'll change your mind. And by this time, I'm bawling. And I ran down and I told Jenny, I'm like, you're not going to believe this. And here's why I took those notes. Because yesterday when I pulled it up, that playlist was in a different order. They change on Thursdays, by the way. This was a Friday. And I'm convinced that God used this because someone needed it to hear that today. It doesn't get any clearer. It doesn't get any clearer what God's wanting to say to us today. So how do we grab onto this? How do we grab onto what Hezekiah found out? How do we grab onto what Isaiah found out? How do we grab onto what Moses and Rahab and Saul and Jesus? We got to understand God's not a genie in a bottle, right? And so many times we treat God like a genie in the bottle, right? We go and we get on our knees and we rub our lamp and we ask for these 3 wishes that we want him to grant. And it's not like that. God doesn't operate that way. He's not there to fulfill our wishes. That's not his purpose. So I want to talk about a couple things here. So at the beginning of this section that I read to you, and if I get this to highlight here, right at the beginning before we did our little movie thing, it says, after these things and these acts of faithfulness, right? So the beginning of our movie with Hezekiah and the faithfulness of God, it started with after these things. So now we've got to go back to the prequel. What were these things? So you don't have to turn there, but it's just a few chapters back. I want to show you a couple things, and I promise I won't read you the whole thing. But 2 Chronicles 29, 1 through 2, Hezekiah began to reign when he was 25 years old, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abijah, and the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that David, his father, had done. So David's not his literal father, but he's in the line of David. And actually Hezekiah, if you go to Matthew, Hezekiah is in the line of Jesus, right? So what did Hezekiah do? He opened the doors of the house of the Lord and repaired them. So at that time, there was no temple, there was no church going on. He opened the doors. He reinstated the Levites. So if you remember back from the Old Testament, the Levites were the priests. They had not been practicing. He restored temple worship, right? So he opened the doors. He redid the temple. He reinstated the Levites. He said, consecrate yourselves. I got some work for you to do. He restored temple worship. He celebrated Passover for the first time in a very long time. Here in 2 Chronicles 30, 26 through 27, it says, so there was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the time of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. Then the priests and the Levites arose and blessed the people, and their voice was heard, and their prayer came to his holy habitation in heaven. I want to put this in context for you. So let's pretend that in the year 1807 here in Willow Springs, the last church closed. So in 1807, there are no churches in Willow Springs. And we've been living as a community since 1807 with no churches. And then, is Brooke here? Then the mayor comes in and says, we need to open a church. See, I read the Bible, and it says we're supposed to worship. And it tells us how. It says we're supposed to have a temple, we're supposed to make sacrifices, we're supposed to follow all these things that are in the first 5 books of the Bible. And say, here's what we're going to go do. We're going to go find one of these churches that are abandoned. We're going to open it back up. We're going to restore it. We're going to find everyone who is a son or a daughter of a pastor. We're going to bring them in. We're going to send them to seminary. We're going to teach them. We're going to get them ready. And we're going to have Easter service this year. That's what he did. He brought everyone back to God. Over 200 years, brought everyone back to God, right? I want to put that in context because when you read these things like this and you're like, nothing since, Solomon, it was 200 years since Solomon. And when Solomon was the wisest man, but he did not finish well as a king. He turned over to other gods. He let other people in his life influence him. By the time Solomon was done being king, Israel was in shambles. It broke into two kingdoms. It just went south. And so for 200 plus years, that's the way Israel had been living. Can you imagine? I mean, there's spots in Willow Springs, you can't throw a rock and not hit a church. Can you imagine not having a church in Willow Springs for 200 years and what this would be like? And can you imagine the joy of coming back to God and celebrating an Easter together? It wasn't Easter back then, but you get it. And then he organized the priests. Once he got everything back together, we had Easter service. He said, okay, here's the deal, guys. Here's what your jobs are, right? We're going to read it right out of the Bible. Here's what your jobs are. He organized the priests. Then Hezekiah did throughout all Judah, and he did what was good and right and faithful before the Lord his God. And every work that he undertook in the service of the house of God and in accordance with the law and the commandments, seeking his God, he did with all his heart and prospered. The Bible is full of examples, not exceptions. When we read things about Hezekiah, I don't want us to sit here and think, oh yeah, but I could never do that. Because here's the deal. I want that to be my obituary. When I die and someone's up here reading my obituary, I wanted to say, he did what was good and right and faithful before the Lord his God. And every work that he undertook in the service of the house of God, in accordance with the law and the commandments, seeking his God, he did with his heart and it prospered. If I can live a life that is my obituary, I've lived a life well. I'm not there yet, just to be clear, in case anyone's wondering. I'm not there. Not even close. As I hear the chuckles from my family, I'm not even close. And here's what I want us to grasp a hold of. So many times we want God to change our story, but we aren't willing to change our lives. See, Hezekiah didn't get what he got because he asked for it. He didn't get what he got because he got down on his knees with Isaiah and he asked for it. He got what he got because him and God were in a relationship, right? I always use this example, and there's a backstory to it, and I'll tell you later. But if you needed to move a hot tub this weekend, and you went down to Main Street and just picked someone at random and said, hey, I need help moving a hot tub. You come help me? How many people do you think would help you? How many people do you think would help you? Not very many, right? Because it's a big hot tub. And that's the story is. There's friends and there's hot tub friends, all right? I should make that clear. There's hot tub moving friends. Yeah, there's hot tub moving friends. And that's what I used to joke about with a buddy of mine. I said, I'm not just your friend, I'm your hot tub moving friend. But if you go to your good friend, right? Well, someone you've got a relationship with, someone who you've maybe done stuff for in the past, and you say, I got a hot tub to move, they're probably going to come help you. And that's what we've got to understand with God. He's not a genie in a bottle. He wants a relationship with us. If we wait until we're in trouble to be the first time we talk to God, he's still going to answer, but it's not going to be the same. He wants us to get that relationship going today. Hezekiah didn't do all these things so that he could get something. He did all these things because it was the right thing to do. And if we want God to change our story, we've got to be willing to change our lives. We've got to be willing to do something different. There's a guy that I follow. He's a leadership consultant. He's a pastor. He's wrote a bunch of books. One of them's the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. His name's John C. Maxwell. John, if you're watching, give me a ring. I'd like to talk to you. But here's a picture of John C. Maxwell. And he's sitting on a stage, and this is kind of what he does now. He goes around, and people pay him money, and he goes to these conferences, and he talks about leadership, right? Or he talks about God, or he talks about whatever. And, it looks pretty cushy up there. He's got his bottle of water. He's leaning on a table. He's sitting in a chair. He talks for a little bit. He gets down. People hand him money, and he goes about his life. And there's most of his talks, he'll say a phrase that I want us to grab a hold of. And so he'll come down off the stage, and he's shaking hands, and he's meeting people. And someone, without a doubt, will come to him and say, I want to do what you do. And his response is always the same. I know you want to do what I do, but do you want to do what I did? Because I did not wake up and stand up on the stage. Now listen to me, millennials. You can't be CEO tomorrow. You got to put in your dues, right? And so everyone wants to go straight from the seat to the stage without paying the dues in between. And it doesn't work that way. And it doesn't work that way in the kingdom of heaven, right? Now, I'm not saying that if you called on Jesus' name today, he's not going to be there for you. But I'm saying he's looking for a relationship with you. And if you want what Hezekiah had, you've got to do what Hezekiah did. You can't just walk in at the last minute and expect that. So we want what Hezekiah had, but are we willing to do what he did? So we can't be the king of Judah, right? But we can be obedient. And everyone hates that word. Especially my daughter. She's waving at me because I say it 7 times a day. Yeah, well, it's on a short day. I already said it 7 today. We can't be obedient. We hate that word because obedient feels like oppression. I'm not going to be obedient. I'm not giving in to the man, right? That's not what it's about. It's about doing God's will. It's about doing what our Father asks us to do, right? There was nothing magical about what Hezekiah did, right? Hezekiah did these great things, but it wasn't magical. It wasn't anything I would even call maybe special, but it was unusual for that time. And guess what? It's unusual for this time. It's still true today. Obedience to God is not necessarily foremost on people's minds today. And I'll just be the first to admit it's a lot of times not first on my mind. But I'll tell you, I've been slapped around enough by God that I understand how important it is, right? Same God. So I want to thank Ryan for bringing Same God, that song, to us. I love that song. And, I'd heard it, but I never really heard it till we had to practice it so Ryan could sing it. And I just love the phrase about, he was a healer then, he's a healer now. He was a forgiver then, he's a forgiver now. Guess what? God is the same. If we act like Hezekiah did back then, God's response to us will be exactly the same as it was to Hezekiah. He will fight our battles. It says it in the Bible. He will fight our battles. So what do we got to do? Humble ourselves, obey his word, and pray. And that was actually my cinnamon roll speech, right? I mean, that was my cinnamon roll thing. Back then I basically said, I know how to lose weight. It's you got to burn more calories than you take in, and that probably means not eating as many cinnamon rolls as I do. So that's the only way to lose weight, and this is the only way to please God. Humble ourselves, obey his word, and pray. And how do I know that? Well, remember that 2 Corinthians phrase? Well, it says right before that, it says 2 Corinthians 8, that it is written, which means it's somewhere else in the Bible. Where it is in the Bible is actually Isaiah. And Isaiah also says this, thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me, and what is the place of my rest? All these things my hand has made, and all these things came to be, declares the Lord. But I want you to listen to this. Hold on to this. But this is the one to whom I look, right? This is the one to whom I look. He who is humble, contrite in spirit, and trembles at my word, right? Humble, contrite in spirit means that basically it's really the same as humble. You're broken down. You understand that God is sovereign. This is a call to action, right? This is what God wants us to do. I really do believe that there are people out here today, maybe listening on live stream, that they need their story changed. Maybe they don't even realize they need their story changed. I've often heard there's 3 types of people. someone currently going through a trial, someone who just came out of a trial, or someone who's getting ready to go through a trial, right? And everyone in here is one of those three people. And so we've got to get us aligned with God's will so that when we go through that trial, or we're coming out of that trial, or maybe someone we love goes through that trial, we know who to point to. This is a call to action. 1 Corinthians 2:9. What no eye has seen, no ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. Right? And he's told him, here's who I love. Here's who I love, is the ones that reach out to me and obey. It's time. It's time to look at our lives and really take stock of where we're at. Really take stock of what is our relationship with Jesus Christ. Really take stock of, do I need to make a change? Do I need to draw closer to him? Do I make every effort to obey his word? Do I make every effort to be willing to do his will? It's all God really wants is a willing heart. And not only is the gift of eternal life there, but he says he's going to give us things we can't even imagine. He's going to give us opportunities we can't even imagine. He's going to give us blessings we can't even imagine.